In this video, I'm going to have a look at installing the legacy Windows XP operating system using VMware Workstation 17.6.2. Now, unfortunately, the Windows XP installation ISO isn't on WinWorld yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a Dell XP reinstallation CD and I'm going to convert it into an ISO using nLite. So I'm going to download Windows XP Service Pack 3 because this has Windows XP Professional Service Pack 2. So nLite was a utility for slipstreaming updates and drivers into a XP installation ISO. We're also going to need the legacy version of VMware Tools that's compatible with Windows XP. So for Windows XP, there was a utility called the Windows Server Update Service Offline Update. And unfortunately, it relies on Microsoft's update servers and they've removed a lot of XP downloads. So what this utility could be used for is creating essentially an update ISO, which has all the updates for Windows XP. So essentially someone's used the utility and created the ISO before Microsoft removed the updates. And they've uploaded this on archive.org. So we can use this to patch the Windows XP installation. So I'm going to insert the Windows XP reinstallation CD and I'm going to create a WinXP folder in downloads and I'm going to copy all the files from the Windows XP reinstallation CD to this folder. So now I'm just going to quickly go ahead and install nLite. And now nLite's installed, so I can go ahead and launch it. So if I select next, and then I need to select browse, go to downloads and select this WinXP folder. Notice it says Service Pack Level 2. If I select next, I can select the Service Pack and the bootable ISO. And I can change the Service Pack level to Service Pack 3. You shouldn't do this if you're using the Media Center edition because this will break the installation of Media Center edition components. So select next and change the label to Dell XP Pro Service Pack 3 and then save the ISO in downloads using the same file name. And now nLite's going to create this installation ISO. So we can just finish. So now that we've got the installation ISO, what we can do is just get rid of things that we no longer need. So we don't need the service pack and we don't need the nLite installation and we don't need this WinXP folder. So let's open up VMware Workstation Player. And let's select Player, File, New Virtual Machine. And we can go ahead and load the XP installation ISO. So this may take you to a wizard which will break the OEM system lock pre-installation and prompt for a product key. So instead, what we can do is select I will install this operating system later. And then from the drop down, select Windows XP. And select next. The maximum disk size is quite limited. I advise changing this to 256 gigabytes. So this won't occupy 256 gigabytes on your solid state drive unless you fully fill up this virtual machine. So this just sets the maximum size that this virtual machine can occupy. Half a gig of RAM is quite limiting, so I would recommend changing it to 4 gigabytes, which is the maximum for a 32-bit operating system. We want to make sure that we've got this Dell XP Service Pack 3 reinstallation ISO. We can only use USB 2.0 with Windows XP, and all the other options we're going to leave at their defaults. So if we select finish, the Windows XP guest should now launch, and it should automatically boot to the Windows XP reinstallation ISO and begin installation. So click into the Windows XP guest, and in order to escape the Windows XP guest, press Ctrl and Alt on the keyboard. So press enter to begin the setup, press F8 to agree to license agreement, press enter, and then you can format the partition using the NTF file system. It doesn't matter if you use the quick or the long format. So it's going to format the virtual drive, and then it's going to copy the Windows XP setup files to this virtual drive. And then the computer is going to reboot. So in the next screen, you're going to be prompted for your regional and language options. So select customize, and in this case, I'm going to change all the options to United Kingdom. And then select next. I'm just going to input my username and call the computer name just VM for virtual machine. And I'm going to change the time zone to GMT. And then I'm going to select next. Use the default workgroup. So the Windows XP setup will then proceed, and then the Windows XP guest will reboot and then prompt you to select OK when it comes to changing the display settings. You'll now be taken to the Windows XP out of the box experience setup. Select next, select not right now, select skip, select no, not at this time, and then input your username. Select next and then select finish. And now you're going to be on the Windows XP desktop. Okay, so Windows XP is installed, but it's not activated. So if we type in the following command, it's going to tell us that we've got a 30-day evaluation period. So this means you'll be able to use Windows XP for a 30-day evaluation period, and then after 30 days, you're essentially going to be locked out. And when you're locked out, you're not going to be able to log back in, and you're not going to be able to activate Windows XP online or buy a retail license, because Microsoft no longer sell Windows XP retail licenses and no longer facilitate activation of Windows XP via their activation servers. Essentially, XP's been removed from them. So you should essentially, if you want to stick to the license agreement, basically recreate your virtual machine every 30 days. Now, since Dell XP reinstallation CD has been used, it carries out Dell OEM system locked pre-installation, which means if the Windows XP guest has a system license internal code of 1.0, such as a Dell system would, a Dell system that came with Windows XP, it will automatically activate Windows XP offline. So there's basically modded ROMs which add the system license internal code 1.0 to the virtual machine, i.e. emulating a Dell BIOS. So this is essentially an unofficial workaround that's not supported by Microsoft or Dell, but neither is XP in general because it's at end of life. So what you would need to do is copy this theoretical file to this folder. And then you would need to make sure that it's named correctly. And then in your virtual machine folder, you've got this virtual machine configuration file, where you can basically edit the configuration using a code editor. In this case, I'm just going to use Notepad. So essentially you want bios440.filename equals, and then in the string, which is enclosed by quotes, you want the name of this modded ROM. And that's it. Once you've got this, your Windows XP guest should essentially emulate a Dell BIOS, and Windows XP should act like it's installed on a Dell system and be activated using Dell XP OEM system locked pre-installation. So I'm not going to do this. I'm just going to leave it unsaved, and it's going to use the default BIOS and give me Windows XP for a 30-day trial. And that way I'm not breaking any license agreements. Okay, so the Security Center is going to warn you that Windows XP isn't updated and that it's got no virus protection. Since this is an end-of-life operating system, it's deemed insecure, and you can essentially just disable these notifications. They're essentially redundant. You should know that Windows XP is basically vulnerable, and not to use it on the internet, or online banking and things wouldn't work with it in any case because it is so old now. So let's now change the ISO to this Windows Server Update Service offline update ISO, and basically when it's mounted it should begin auto running. And here you can select some optional frameworks such as the .NET framework and Silverlight, as well as PowerShell and DirectX. So I forgot to click DirectX here, but you're essentially probably going to want to select this. And then we can check automatically reboot and recall. And then we can just select start. So basically it's going to check your system, see what updates it has and what updates it needs, and it's going to go ahead and automatically install all the updates for Windows XP. And then this, what looks like an error message, is just a warning telling you that the system's going to reboot. So it'll reboot and then recall the Windows Server Update Service offline script and continue installation of the updates. So this will take quite a while, and as it's going to automatically recall the script and continue the update, you can go away and come back. Okay, so This is the final restart, and now the Windows XP is patched. So if I go to Control Panel and add or remove programs, we'll see that these additional components are added and the Windows XP is patched. The Windows Media Player version is still at version 9, and that's because this version of Windows XP isn't activated. So now that Windows XP is up to date, what we can do is we can install VMware Tools. So let's switch to the VMware Tools ISO, and it should begin auto running. If not, go to Start and then Computer and then start the autoplay. So I might have done this a bit too fast, and it's came up with an error that there's already an installation beginning. So I'm just going to select OK, and now just select Next, Next, and Install. And then Finish, and then Yes. So VMware Tools is now installed, and this means that we should be able to resize the screen, and we should also be able to drag and drop files between the Windows XP guest and the Windows 11 host. So it looks like I'm being a bit too fast here, so the VMware Tools haven't actually loaded properly. So let me just select them here and select Yes, and now the resizing works as expected. So the main reason that people emulate such an old operating system is that they've got a specific device that only works with this old version of Windows, because it's using software that's dependent on old frameworks and requires this old version of Windows to run. So this can be a specialized scientific instrument, or in this case I'm just going to demonstrate the process using a Logitech Pro 9000 camera. So if I right click Computer and select Properties and go to Device Manager, I can see that the driver is not installed. So I can download this driver from Logitech, and as I mentioned, you can drag and drop between the Windows 11 host and the Windows XP guest. So you can double click the setup, and in this case I'm just going to go ahead and install, and it's detected the Logitech Pro 9000 camera because it's connected to the Windows XP guest via the Windows 11 host. So yeah, maybe it looks like it's not working because it's just pointing at this XPS 8960, which has a black case. So this was a really good webcam back in the day, but now its response time is very slow compared to modern cameras. So that's just an example of using a USB device. So using a USB 2.0 device with a Windows XP driver is pretty straightforward. Many legacy scientific instruments will use a serial port instead of a USB port, so we can also have a look at connecting a serial port. So you're going to need a USB to serial adapter, and I'd recommend having a look at the Windows 11 hosts device manager, just so you can see the port number and set the speed of the serial port. So what we can do is edit the virtual machine settings of the Windows XP guest and add the serial port. So if you're using multiple, you're probably going to want to select each individual serial port from the host, because you may get confused what port is what when you use the auto detect. If you're using a single port, the auto detect should be fine. So you're also going to want to check the device manager in Windows XP. And here you're going to want to see what is the port number and what is the speed. So notice it was port 3 in the Windows 11 guest, and it's port 1 in the Windows XP host. So you're going to want to make sure you don't get confused.